Welcome to Basalt's first Wednesdays, where we talk about technology, about it, around it, monetizing it, and everything in between, because technology is hard and sharing helps. Kyle is, so firstly, I'm Kyle Redelinghuys. I'm Managing Director of Basalt. I'm joined by the ever handsome VT, who's our CTO, and by the equally as handsome Kyle Redelinghuys. And now we're going to go into his favorite thing in the world. I'm going to talk about some of his amazing achievements, which I know he loves me doing because he's quite humble. So Kyle, as far I've known him for many decades now, and ever since I've known him, he's been very, very big into products and building stuff and just getting shit done. I mean, just since I've known him, we've gone from like trying to build holograms, remember that back in the day, actually trying to build a 3D hologram, onto more sort of solid things. He built trailrunner.co.za. He built a fitness app called Fighter Bear. He built an amazing note-taking app, so digital notes for physical books called QuoteNote. He built COVID-19 API, probably one of the first APIs for COVID data that came up, which has had over 606 million API requests since. He's been a principal consultant at Visa. He's headed up special projects at a special encryption communication company. He's been CTO of other companies. He's built pretty much single-handedly at first a core banking platform. So when it comes to talking about products and how to turn it into businesses, I think we've got the right person. You're welcome, Kyle.
Welcome, man. I don't know if anyone else found that boring, but yeah, we can just get into the meat of it. I hate reading long lists of it. It's just weird. But happy to be here. Happy to have a chat.
Look, I definitely did that on purpose because I know how much you love it. So you can thank me later.
Everyone could see my face and just be like, I hate that stuff.
I could have built a product in that time. So just to give you guys an idea of what, this is a little bit more of a structured space. We're going to be talking, super casually for the next 45 minutes or so. Just about products, about businesses, turning products into businesses. And then, you're welcome to send some questions over to the sphere in the meantime. After sort of 30 minutes or 45 minutes or so, we'll open up the floor and take some questions. So just jot down any questions you have. And we'll jump straight into it. I always like to start with definitions. What would you define a product as? Like specifically a product that is a business. How do you see it? Like, how do you get your head around it?
For me, a product has always just been something that someone finds useful in some way, right? Even if that someone is you, right? I think that's the simplest definition. And something that's a business is if you have a single paying customer, basically, right? So for me, that's like the primary definition of what a
that's not
is.
You.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, well, paying customer that isn't you, and hopefully not friends and family, but it doesn't matter at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question because most of the things I've built have been from me having a need and just filling that need and assuming, rightly or wrongly, that other people have the same need or similar need. And I've built things that have been out there already. Do you know what I mean? So that doesn't put me off anything. But just building stuff that people want and are willing to pay for at the end of the day.
And what, I mean, like, just to get straight into the meat of it, I guess, to use your words from earlier, where do you think that line is where you're like moving something from a side project sort of something you're tinkering on the weekend into an actual business, and or is it something that you I know you say it's a need that you have or whatever the case is, but is it usually with the sight of it becoming a product? I mean, a business at the end of the day.
These are weird questions, Carl. There's no line, bro.
Sorry, I'm a weird guy.
No. I mean, they're good. They're weird in the sense that I haven't thought about it from these angles before. Because the journey, right, for a product is for me, and this is for everything that I've built, is I have something that I want to do. I have a long list of products that are like ideas, big and small, that I want to tackle. Generally, I want to learn how to code either in a new language or in a new paradigm, or if I'm doing now, I'm busy researching coding methods and like going through like old school architectural books and just trying to expand my knowledge. And I'm using that in this new application that I'm building. So for me, it's primarily a vehicle for learning, with the output being, here's something useful that I found useful that other people may find too. And the line between, is this a side project and is it, I don't know, it's never not a side project, really, right? Is it a business? Is people at least paying attention to it,
separate,
right? And that is at least having it publicly accessible, at the least. It doesn't necessarily involve advertising or anything like that.
I suppose it's also like there's a case of it going, and sorry, VT, just jump in whenever you like. I feel like I'm talking too much.
No, don't.
There's some point where the product almost takes over in a weird way. It's like not to get too sort of cosmic, but the product becomes its own entity, and I think back so BVNK, the core bank, for those of you who don't know, the core banking startup that Kyle founded, I was employee number one, so I was quite intimately involved in that. And when I first joined, it was for all intents and purposes like an e-wallet, right? I mean, a pretty good, solid e-wallet. But from the conversations that we had and almost like chewing on it, it kind of turned into its own thing. And then there's like a momentum, I guess, that sort of takes you on this journey.
Yeah, the product starts to gain a momentum in and of itself, right? And that can be both positive and negative. So the idea that I'm building now is basically, it's like a trade execution engine for stocks, right? With the thinking that you have an idea of what you want to trade, what conditions you want to enter into a trade, and then what conditions you want to exit from that trade, right? And I'm trying to make it as generic as possible. So it's definitely non-trivial. But I've tried this before, and I went in the wrong direction so much that the momentum actually slowed down to a halt, where I was like, actually, I don't want to do this, right, anymore. It's not like, it's just jut at the end of the day. And then I've redone it now, and I've built it into something that I'm like super stoked to work on. And now there's, I don't know, probably like 30,000 lines of code or something that I've written, and it's like, cool. Like there's the project itself pulls me, because there's always stuff to do. So it pulls me to do these things, and it's like so close, and you have these little milestones. But a great example of this is when I built the COVID API. So we were in Switzerland, and Italy just shut their borders, and I wanted to understand and kind of do some projections about what was the likelihood of the borders being closed, so that we could, are we going to get home or not, basically. And I just actually wanted the projection, but there was no nice, clean source of data. So I was like, well, let me just build this quickly, because it's not that hard, right? There's a CSV file, and you just pass it, and you group it, and you expose it through an API. But then once it was live and people were using it, you find things to do. And the more you find, the more useful people find it, and then the more people use it, etc. So, once, my goal was like, wow, if I get 100,000 hits, that would be amazing. And that happened within like 3 days or something. And, and then it just kind of took off from there. And then there's like this whole community around it. And like, it just kind of it starts to drive itself.
So it's funny. Just I was actually there as well on that occurrence, and was trying to do a similar thing, but built it in Google Sheets. Just to get data. Because I mean, the whole point of what we were trying to do is find out if we're going to have problems getting home or not, and then gave up and went to play foosball while Kyle hacked away his computer on a Friday evening in Zurich. It was pretty funny. But yeah, like I mean, seeing that journey firsthand was super super interesting. Is especially how quickly things happened, and
Yeah, and then
like how it just takes over.
Yeah, and then the miracle of monetizing it, right? Because by the time I decided to monetize it, I didn't build it with any registration, so it was just like a utility effectively. So anyone could use it or abuse it, right? There was no rate limiting in the beginning. And then by the time I decided to monetize it, fine, there were loads of people using it, like 1 million requests a day or something. But there were like many other APIs, right? And then all I did I just started rate limiting people because the infrastructure spend was like $1,000 a month. It was just crazy. So, and the niceties of DigitalOcean,
by the way.
Yeah, 1,000. Yeah. So, and then basically turned on rate limiting, and then people started kind of paying again through some hacker implementation through PayPal, whatever. But it also goes to prove or to show the stickiness of APIs, right? So APIs are super sticky because if you've integrated anything around it, then it is a mission for you to change as a consumer of the API. It's a mission for you to change your integration. So you're much more likely to pay a small fee and just save yourself the headache than to spend 2 days or 2 weeks changing the implementation to a free API.
I've got a question, right? I think the COVID-19 API sounds like a lot of what other products sound like an accident, right? You try to do something and then you accidentally become successful, and can you really say that's a repeatable way of creating like a product business?
Yes, because you, I don't know, yes or no, I guess. You identify the need, right? And the need was just people, well, it was my need again, and I knew other developers would appreciate it. So it was there. And then, there were some things that added to the popularity of the API outside of it, presenting data in a really nice, easy way that's super ingestible. And, there was a bunch of logic within the API that made it valuable. But outside of that, it was the domain, covid19api.com, right? So it was gold. And then the second thing was that it was one of the first. So those two factors gave it all the momentum it needed to carry on to this day. I did try and replicate it shortly afterwards with the travel advice API, which was working, by the way. But the issue was actually more on the understanding of the difficulty around what I was trying to do, which was pass unstructured data into like a very logical kind of split sequence, which was much harder than I anticipated. So, but again, we got through that. We got probably like 1,500 signups, something like that, with people knowing the price. That was like $30 to $90 a month. We just couldn't convert them because the data wasn't as good as I guess they were expecting or I was expecting. And yeah, so I repeated it to some extent there.
You see, but that's what my question is, right? Because, like, for example, I know you started BVNK. That was like a very specific thing. You thought there's a market there, and if you brought this product, it could solve for that problem, and it could be a sustainable business. Versus the COVID API, you needed data, and I'm sure you were not expecting the kind of traffic that you got. Otherwise, you would have included rate limiting from the get-go, right? And what I'm trying to understand, like, what are the major differences that you've seen versus starting out saying that I want to build a product business, or I want to build a business on the back of this product, versus I want to solve a problem for myself and then, just kind of like release it in the universe, and the stickiness of the two different approaches.
Yeah. So, using BVNK as the counter is such a good example. So BVNK is a core banking system. A bit of background why I started it, right? I have a big interest in finance, obviously, in being a developer as well. I decided that banking was super bad and it could be better. Why can't you make payments between your accounts in the same bank on a weekend? Like, it makes literally zero sense, right? Even today, I don't know why. So, and for me, it was like, oh, obviously this is a technical thing, which, half and half. So I decided to implement like a core banking system from scratch, from first principles, finding out all the information I needed, whatever. That started to gain some interest. Then we got funding. Then we had to pivot like 3 times, and then had some success. Whereas the COVID API was like, here's a need, right? Let me build this product around the need. And the difference is that the BVNK, the only reason it survived was because we had funding, right? To make the mistakes. The mistake that we made was not understanding the need. Right? If I had to start BVNK again, knowing what I know, it would be like, build these tiny services first, digital signatures, identity, whatever, and then go out into the core. Because, and so it's a much better approach to understand the need deeply, and that's why it's easy if it's your need.
Cool. No, look,
Yeah,
go ahead, Kyle. Sorry.
Go. No.
No, because
I talked way too much in the beginning. It's your turn.
The reason I'm asking, right, is like I see it on Twitter every day. I think a lot of us assume a need and then we like invent a problem that doesn't exist. And I see apps like this all the time. When you critique them, then people just assume that you're negative. And you ask the simple question like, what problem are you solving? Because when you, at least in my experience, a lot of people, or aspiring entrepreneurs, don't understand the difference between like a product business, a business where the product itself is a business, or like a product enabled or a technology enabled business where the technology is not the primary thing that you're selling, but it's something that's actually like supporting your business. And I guess everyone has their Zuckerberg and Bezos started in a garage, so I'm going to start in a garage, and regardless of what problem I'm solving, I'm going to be successful. And like, you talk about the success on the COVID API. Yes, you identify the need. We all did. I contributed, to like COVID data in South Africa in the beginning of the pandemic, and for me, I didn't end up making money. What I ended up earning is burnout, because I realized like the requirements of open source, right? Because like I was contributing to this thing, Dr. Bukosi from the University of Pretoria was like leading it, and I'm like so excited. I wanted to build a Golang API. I built an API, and every day it was like this messages in my inbox. We want to see provincial data. We want to see this. This is not accurate. Can you catch this? And like we identified the same problem. You ended up being able to monetize, and I ended up not contributing to open source anymore. Right?
So I just want to comment here, because I know it's something that Kyle won't say because it's going to be talking about himself again. So just, I don't know, block your ears or something. But one of the things that I really appreciate about Kyle, and I don't know if it necessarily applies to COVID API in this case, but it definitely applies to BVNK, is that like ambitious naivety So what I mean by that is, and I remember quite clearly, I was walking in company gardens because that's where we used to have our like daily stand-ups, walking through company gardens, and we were talking about this wallet system that we had, and it's like, what can we do with it? Because we had a big deal with Pricer that fell through, so we were sort of on the back ends, we had investors that invested, and we didn't have a big deal anymore. So it's like, what can we do? And like I remember rattling off 4 or 5 different ideas, and Kyle just be like, nah, it's not big enough. Nah, it's not big enough. Nah, it's not big enough. And then he's like, what about core banking? Like, let's just go like as big as we can. And then for me, the difference is going from what about core banking to literally the next week booking flights to Switzerland to meet with banks in Switzerland. Like complete, and that's why I say ambitious naivety, because we had no idea what we were getting into. Like at that time, it was a core banking system is an e-wallet with a general ledger. Easy, we can do this.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've really appreciated about Kyle in general, is that sort of bold step above that. But I'm interested to see what that step, if there was one, for COVID API.
Yeah, I mean, COVID API, it was just like aggressively pursuing the aggregation of the data and making it more useful, right? So like, and then, my God, having a clean data source. That was actually the biggest impediment. So actually, I don't know if everyone knows Mongo, right? So MongoDB. So they reached out to me and they were like, hey, we're interested in API, but like we started building this and basically gave up because JHU's data, Johns Hopkins University's data was changing. And it was changing in structure, like the field structure, but also in the data. So they'll change like 7 days ago data, right? So it's like it all of a sudden becomes like this harder thing to solve. But in having solved it, you become just more and more and more valuable. And it's that kind of like doubling down into, what makes something useful. And then you keep digging and keep digging and keep digging. And then you just end up building a really good product. And that's it. I mean, like Austin on Twitter tweeted this the other day, is like doubling down on what customers want is the best strategy. So like, let's say, let me think of another product, like a quote notebook, right? So we're going to find out that people like sharing images more than anything else, like more than getting book metadata, more than getting whatever. So then the next boatload of cash or time or whatever is going to spend on making sharing like super easy. And then people are going to share more. And then you're going to be like, okay, now people are actually following, right? And then it's like, cool, we need like some social graph system. And it's like, and you just keep following. People are laying down a brick road for you to follow. You just got to look for it and not think what you think would be cool, but listen to what people are telling you that will be cool. 99 times out of 100, you're on Steve Jobs or anyone who has this vision and you're going to pull people along. That's true, though. You'll be like, oh, they'll get it. No, they won't get it, right?
No, life isn't field of dreams, right?
Yeah.
Build it and they will come.
Yeah.
It doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't. Build it and you've built it. That's it, right? There's no anything. But just listen to, like, it's like a little thread of string that you just keep pulling on. You just keep pulling and you keep pulling and you keep pulling. And then eventually you'll build a good product. And also, I just want to say something like...
Or you've got no T-shirt left.
Follow the yarn. Just on like... Because there's obviously some element of luck and timing involved, right? And that was the case for COVID. There were like 2 or 3 things that kind of, it was right timing. I just want to address it directly. Like obviously that's involved, and it's involved with most successes, right? Like if Microsoft had started 5 years earlier, probably wouldn't have gone anywhere. Like it's these things, right? It's just right time, right place, blah, 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 whatever. Or trying something for 10 years and on the 10th year, it works, right? They're all of these things. But the point is that you have to try, right? COVID API is not my first side project that I've built. It's probably like my 20th, right? And all of the others are just like things, right? Things that I've done and have failed at. Well, not failed at, you learn from it. So just treat it as like a learning experience, and if it takes off, cool. Don't put pressure on it to take off. It's not going to work, right?
Kind of like fat pants.
But you know,
like there's a chance that you won't wear them again, but then one day you like lose a bit of weight and you're like, hey, I've got new jeans. It becomes something.
What is that?
you know, look, I think it's look, I think it's really easy to say don't put a lot of pressure on it. But I think it's like the whole conversation about, you know, private people going on Twitter and tweeting about how private they are, right? So you go on Twitter and you tweet about how you're taking it easy, and you're not putting pressure on it, but you know you're secretly putting this pressure on, because I think everyone wants to be successful. That's why people are spending so much time on products and whatever side projects or anything like that. And I mean, there's so much material out there. We've seen other people build products and be successful. We've seen people share what works and what doesn't work. We've all seen the example of starting with a skateboard, and then a bike, and then a car, instead of like starting with a wheel. But I feel like we still repeat the exact same mistakes, because your example of like pulling on a thread, for me, is like starting small, seeing something like very small, and then like pulling on it. And if I was to kind of like take that example into building a product, the idea would be like what is really like the minimum lovable product? What's the smallest like thing that you could do that like would allow like you to test that idea? And you spoke about the code notes thing that you're building, and for something like that, it might be, you know, an internal alpha, allowing people to kind of just have a camera, scan the thing, and then see the text, right? They can't share it, they can't do anything else, but like this little thing that was not possible before suddenly becomes possible. I guess my question is like, how small do you go? What's too small and what's too medium? In that starting small.
Yeah, I mean, I think honestly, it's relative to the problem you're trying to solve, right? So the MVP for, I actually love this new term, minimal lovable product. It's like so nice and warm. But so an MVP for the COVID API was like being able to get data by country, right, and status, because they were all separate initially. So give me South African deaths from the beginning of time. Cool, boom, you're done. Whereas the minimum viable product for this finance fintech app that I'm building is like, you know, I'm probably like 100 hours in, and I still have probably like 200 or 300 more. To get to MVP, I probably have, to be fair, like 150 more. So that's like 250 hours spent, and I mean 250 hours spent on building this MVP, just because it's so complex. So it depends on what you want to do, and if you aren't willing to spend that amount of time to get to an MVP for whatever reason, and there's many, scope down, right? So I'm not looking for massive product market fit for this right now. I just want to use it for my stuff, of course, right? But if I wanted to bring it down to MVP, it would be like, how do I do this in 50 hours, right? Or 30, or whatever the case. Who do I show, you know? So yeah, I think it's it. And I mean, you know, just to address your previous point, where it's like speaking about like, oh, you know, you try a project and you want to put pressure on it, and, you know, to make money from it and whatever. I was obviously that guy as well, but over time my views change, in the sense that, like, have a longer horizon, right? Don't think, and there's several reasons for that, but like, have a longer horizon. Don't think it has to be this project that I make money from, or the next one. Be like, a project within 10 years of me trying this will make me the money that I'm looking to make. And that can be 50,000 Rand a month or 500,000 Rand a month, right? It's just think bigger, because also when you think bigger, you're trusting more in yourself, because you're saying, like, I'm going to be getting better over time, right? I'm going to have more than this one idea, which is probably not as great as you think, honestly. And you'll think that as well, by the way, like looking back. So it's not like just me being a dick or something, but so just trust in yourself and look a bit longer.
I think it's like it's a probabilistic model. It's one of those things where you exponentially increase the risk of something failing if you focus in on one thing. Sure, you might get it right. The chances are very, very small. Whereas if you treat it as one of many or one of n, then not only have you got a bigger chance of cracking something that will, unravel in that beautiful way that we were talking about, but also you're a lot more, at least in my opinion, a lot more open to the feedback and the learnings that come with it.
Yeah.
Because you're not as emotionally tied to that one project, And I think, like, for me, at least for me, BVNK was probably the first, like product that I was, super involved in. And it was a lesson for me is realizing that, when we were talking about pivoting and stuff, is that I had emotionally invested in this one idea. And because I had emotionally invested in this one idea, I wasn't taking the learnings as easily as I could have been, because, you sort of, you almost siloed yourself and thinking in a broader term, thinking, over a whole bunch of projects, almost sort of makes you intuitively more open to that feedback and that iteration.
Well, you got to have a soft ego, right? That's basically what it comes down to. Thinking like, maybe my initial idea wasn't that great. Like maybe, it can't be too far though. Like that's the other thing. So like, we wanted to start a bank.
Yeah.
We didn't want to, I don't know, like just make a banking app for someone else to use. It's like boring to me. So if that's where the market's telling you to go, then just, start something else or whatever. But yeah, don't think you know everything, because But the more you learn, the more you realize you don't.
What about the flip side of that, right? Because the thing is that starting something new is fun, right? Like buying a domain is easy, and going project new is easy, and it's exciting. I mean, you might have an idea, and let's take the book codes app. You have an idea, and you think, okay, cool. The core of this thing is that I take a picture of a book, of a page, and then I do some OCR. And you try it with the first book and it's successful, it's great, right? So it works for an English book with a specific font, and it's easy to validate, right? Because you can do it over like in a few hours, and you're like, you know what, my core idea has been tested. Doing things like sharing and whatnot is easy, until you start building out again, the MVP, and then you start realizing, oh crap, there's like a million different fonts that a book could be in, and then there's like different languages, and then you get to the hard stuff, and that's the stuff that's not fun anymore, right? Because at this point you're not doing OCR, you're figuring out what language is this and this, and then it gets tedious, and then you end up starting to feel like, okay, maybe this idea is not great, and maybe what I can do now is use that OCR to figure out what the size of a rug is, to be able to determine the price of for a car, a rug cleaning company, like, right?
Hard
and then you're like, okay, cool.
And then you retire.
And then you're like, that's great. And you start doing that, and again you fall into the same cycle. The starting is fun, but the middle stuff is not. Yeah. Right? So how do you balance the learning from your mistakes, but not and not pivoting too early? Like not pivoting because you have to do the monotonous, mundane, boring middle stuff that no one wants to actually talk about in tech businesses.
Yeah. Because I mean, of course, I'm also the first part is the best. It's the most creative, and you have the most flexibility, and you haven't put constraints on yourself, because that's what coding does. You know, especially if you code badly. again, I'm going to come back to the thing of like, don't be precious about the idea, and meaning treat it as a learning exercise, right? The way I'm approaching, so I'll just use the example of this fintech thing I'm building. The way I'm approaching it, it's like, cool, I'm going to do, I don't know, 2 hours a day, right, on this, and 4 hours over the weekend until I'm done, right? And in my mind, so this has changed over time, and again, it depends on what you're aiming for and the size of the ticket and whatever. The size of the ticket of this fintech, and what I mean is like, how much money could I potentially sell this application for one day, is very high, I think. Right? That's my personal belief, right? So I'm putting a lot of effort in up front, launching an almost perfect product, right? Or like having some pre-launches and whatever and getting feedback. But the core stuff is perfect, like 90+% test coverage, like beautiful. Then I expect fully to spend another year in that dead middle zone of working 20 hours a week on this until I start to see some real traction. And real traction for me is like probably like 5,000 or 10,000 a month, right? And the point is that you should, as much as possible, get used to being in that zone, that dead middle zone. It's the worst though. I don't want to do it, right? Like with the quote note, you can work, even if you're working with OCR bits, you're like, oh, this is super cool. You're like, oh, let me add subscriptions. You're like, oh my God, subscriptions is like as much work or more than doing this thing. And then it's like, okay, what about Apple sign-in? It'd be like, oh, Jesus, they haven't done the flipping thing for this language that I'm building in, and I have to like hack it together, and it's all of the other stuff, but it's all part of it, right? So it's like, just push through, get used to those, times where it's not fun. And that's where the success comes. It's on the other side of that. So if you want to quit in the middle, fine, and start again. But you'll be 100 times better if you just go through these things and give it like 6 months or a year or whatever, but just push through until you feel like, cool, it's done and I can release it. That should be your metric.
So this reminds me a lot of that study, and obviously I'm going to paraphrase because I can't remember the study like verbatim, but where they did this test with marshmallows. So they had little toddlers, and they put a marshmallow in front of them, and they said, if you don't eat this marshmallow, we're going to come back in 5 minutes, you'll get 2 marshmallows. And like 70% of the kids, as the adult, I know my son would be like that. As the adult leaves the room, that marshmallow is fucked. Excuse my language. Like it's done. Like that marshmallow is over. But there's that 30% of people that almost have an inclination to ride out, have some grit, push through that middle zone to get to the bigger reward. And I definitely think it's something that can be learned. I mean, I feel like I feel like I was definitely that first kid, eating the marshmallows, and I've grown into someone who understands that it's important to hold off on the marshmallows. But I think that there's a reason that entrepreneurship is so hard in general. Elon Musk says it's like chewing glass and staring into the abyss. And I think it's very much because of that middle zone, and that middle zone takes many forms, but it can be that period between the excitement of a new project and gaining first traction, but it can also be that zone between the first bit of success and like getting to a place where things are stable. There's these iterative sort of zones that you're going to really bite the bullet with.
For me, the zone is very clear. What the zone is, right? It's learning. It's the discomfort that comes from learning something new, right? So if you want to go and study, or if you want to learn a language or whatever, there's this place after the first, or like a couple of hours or whatever, depending on what you're learning, where you get to, it's like, oh, actually now I'm onto the hard stuff, and like you're struggling, and it's not comfortable, and it's not nice, and you're not having fun anymore, right? But that is where learning starts, right? The rest is just kind of recollection.
It's not lost time.
Yeah, but that, and that is the middle ground, because you're learning to build an app. If you don't have revenue, you're learning why you don't have revenue. you have to figure it out, and it's not easy to figure out, right? You're learning why you're losing customers. You're learning like all of these things throughout the life cycle of your product or your company or whatever it is. But that's what it's about. It's that. And I mean, for anyone interested, you should read a book called The Art of Learning by Josh Waitzkin. And he describes this is the like learning zone, right? It's not necessarily why you eat glass and whatever, because that comes from like.
Is he that Tai Chi guy?
Dude, he's actually
he won Tai Chi champs and chess championship.
So he was chess man first, and he was I think he was the star or whatever of Finding Bobby Fischer, right? So it's basically him.
Oh yes, he was that guy.
Because he was a kid and he just won everything, become a grandmaster at like 12, I don't know, something like crazy. And then he's like, hey, I'm actually kind of good at learning stuff. So then he became like Tai Chi champ, and now he's just, I don't know, doing whatever.
Natural progression. Obviously. Yeah. Chess to Tai Chi.
Yeah.
like intuitive next step.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, he wrote a really good book on that zone, right? And it's whenever, because it happens all the time. Like for this side project, I'm waking up at 5 a.m. every morning and doing like an hour or 2 hours before a full day of work, and then before doing some work in the evening. And it's obviously not fun, right? I'd much rather sleep, but it's at all.
You said that so seriously.
I'm so tired today. So
it's like it was so believable.
I'm just like, please let me sleep. But I know if I don't do that, or rather, I know if I do that, within 3 months I'll be in a massively different place than I am now. Like even now, probably like 60% of the back end is done. If I didn't do this every day,
compound interest.
Yeah, I mean, I was away this weekend in Ireland, woke up early on holiday, did some work. Just consistency, man. That's what happens. Consistency.
Cool.
Amazing. I think this is a great time to open up to the floor. I hope everyone's got questions. But VT, you're gonna have to help me here, because as we established earlier, I'm a noob with this Twitter Spaces thing.
Yep.
So
yeah, look, I think guys, if and girls and listening, if you have any questions, please come up. I think the three of us can talk until midnight or forever, even farther than that. Cool. I see Rod just connecting.
This is easier than expected. You just press on the person and say accept. Technology, hey.
Hey Kyle, Fronny here. I've spoken open here before with the other guy, but thanks for letting me. I think one of the big things you talked about is product, and I've recently just joined a product, and came to a situation where they've had a bit of internal changes recently, and when you have these new people, they're always it's a big different mentality when it's more of a startup and doing your own thing, where you're not writing code, you're writing a product. So don't reinvent the wheel. Like, you're never going to make a great forget password, right? And I think that's where people go wrong, is that they're, at corporates, you will do everything. But when you're doing it yourself, you can't afford to do that, because you're just going to spend 3 months just wasting money. And how do you go about that? How do you see that? And how do you avoid that from the beginning and try and readapt? Because we're not going to make cloud engineers. We're going to have to, train them. And how do you get them to be like that?
That's awesome. So for me, when it's like a side project and it's just you, it's finding out what your core USP is and not building as much as what you can of everything else, right? So it's like, my core USP is sharing COVID data. What I don't care about is, like hosting issues or anything like that. So just Docker, boom, or initially it was actually just a binary on some $5 instance. Don't worry about anything else except your core USP. When it comes to building products, or like let's say you're a product-driven company and you have a product or multiple products, it's the same philosophy, and you have to enforce it like almost at a cultural level. But yeah, it's a harder one to solve, man, because especially if you have a change in management, they come in and they just want to throw things around to show that they're doing stuff normally. And yeah, You just got to kind of resist that. But yeah, just build on
Yeah,
the
cool.
shoulders.
Yeah,
Right. Yeah.
I think yeah, the best thing is the market's changed, and there's a lot of opportunity for everybody. It's just we're gonna have to make it ourselves. You know, that's the big thing. But thanks. Yeah.
Cool.
It doesn't look like people have questions. If you have a question, please request to come up and
Well, I have a question, bro.
Yeah.
For you, VT. So you building this new startup, Glance, right? It's called Glance.
Don't ask me about Glance. I'm really scared because we close to like our V 0.1.0.
And so like how have you gone about it, right? So this is about building products. So like what do you agree or disagree with kind of my approach, and what have you done things differently?
Look, so I've obviously I've been building products like my entire career, building products for other people, and I kind of struggled building my own stuff because if you're building something in a team and it's not quite perfect, you can blame other people, right? It's because Kyle sucked, his code sucked. I couldn't, like you built the back end and I built the front end. Obviously, that's why this thing is slow. And when you
my code definitely sucks.
When you're building something for yourself, like it's a different ball game, and when you care about other people's opinions, it can really derail you. I mean, like back in 2014, I thought I had like a perfect idea, and I wrote a web scraper, kind of like scrape like what time shops are open, because every single time like I'd leave my place and go to the shops, and I wasn't really sure if Spy is open at this time or it's closed or anything like that. So I built something, and like it worked for me. I actually used it for about 6 months. I'd like, okay, because the iStore open is Checkers open at this time,
Right.
and it was great. But then a friend of mine who I was working with said, no, like it's not really good enough, like because it should almost be able to guess what shop you want to go to at this time, and then it got really complicated, and I started doubting myself and shut down, and that happened with maybe like 20 other ideas. I don't know how many domains I've bought, and products are sitting on GitHub. And with Glance, I think I've been a bit more patient with myself because like I started to solve one specific problem, right? So I do my own taxes every year, and how I do that is
that's the point.
and how I do that mainly is I'll actually print out like my bank statements. So I use multiple banks. I'll print out my bank statements. I have different color highlighters for this specific reason, and I'll highlight, for example, like rental income in one color, and salary in something else, like all of that, like, and then calculate and write things down. And I'm a bit OCD about this, so I'll literally check it like 7 times, make sure that I did it correctly. And every single year, it takes me a lot of time to do it. And I said, it would really be cool if I could, like automatically do that. So how much rental income did I get or anything like that? And from this, I started coming up with more use cases, right? So my wife wants to buy a stove, and all I have to ask is like, how much is a stove? And she could say, maybe it's 10 grand. And then I want to be able to like have this app that has all my financial data, like tell me if I can afford it. So I want to buy a stove that's 7 grand. How many months do I have to save, and how much for this not to be painful? Then there's like more use cases, and I really wondered about this. I think 3 months after lockdown, I noticed that I'm not really like driving my car as much, and obviously I'm not traveling to work. I was really interested in like the difference in like spending habits. So I had an idea that I'm spending more on food and less on travel, and more on the internet and more on electricity and less on other stuff like coffee, right? but I didn't have an exact answer as to like how much. So for me, I think like Glance was born out of that. And I spent 8 months, I think, last year, convincing myself, because I'm building this for myself, I'm gonna build it as an iOS app. I'm gonna use Tesseract for OCR and all of it. And I got very far, but I started hitting limitations on it. So this year I was like, you know what? I learned all the lessons from last year. I still have the code base, but actually it's not gonna be like an on-device kind of thing. I'm gonna have a server, but I'm gonna have it like very cheap, and then I'm gonna validate certain things. And because I'm still convinced I'm building it for myself, I'm not tired. And when things get really hard and I hit a roadblock, I just stop. Like literally, I struggled with something for 3 days and I just stopped. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna look at this, and I came back 2 days later. I had a solution. So because there's no expectation of like making money or getting this out there for someone else, like it's easy to continue.
There's an expectation for you to get it out for me, because I have the same problem. So best you hustle, hey. I think Zano was actually first, and then Mokontli, but then Zano had problems connecting. But Zano, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I just want to ask one question. Like, how do you guys actually manage to balance everything? Because that's the one thing I've always struggled on, especially when it comes to like side projects, like balancing things out at home with family, and and then also trying to minimize expectation. Because normally, when you have family and stuff, you're always like hustling, or you're doing something also on the side that does something from them. How do you balance all of that? Because family can also be needy. Our wives, our fiancés can be needy, and you find that when you're at that point where you zoned in, that person wants like attention there. So I've always been curious, how do you guys balance all of this?
Yes, Kyle, I'm curious too. How?
I mean, before I had, like, when I was in my 20s, and I was like aggressively upskilling, I'd work a lot, like 4 hours a night after work, and then probably like 16 over the weekend or something, just because I wanted to learn.
Can I quickly tell a quick story on that specific point, just to indicate how hectic it was? Kyle scheduled everything to the point where one of our mutual friends, like, like, hey, man, you want to hang out on the weekend? Sure. What about 3 o'clock on Saturday? He came at 3:30 because he was always late, even though he always says that he's always on time. That's another story. He came at 3:30 and Kyle was like, bro, I scheduled 2 hours for this. We only got an hour and a half left, because it was like work.
Yeah.
That like is the intensity. I mean, it was insane.
It was a bit hardcore. But anyway, so like now I have a fiance, and we obviously want to spend time with her and whatever, and I want to get married actually. So how I'm managing this now is two ways. So the first is doing stuff outside of the time that we are together, right? So that means waking up early. And right now 5 o'clock's the earliest I can do, because we go to bed together. So, you have to manage that. And then the second thing is like managing expectations on the weekend. So like I basically sat down and I was like, listen, like this is the plan. We're going to start a family, whatever. I want us to have enough money for all of these things, which means I'm going to work a lot, and I don't mind it. But like there's sacrifice from both sides, and the sacrifice from your side is that we spend less time together. And it's not much less, but it's less, right? So next time when there's some angst about not having enough time on a Saturday or whatever, just think back to the agreement that we have. Right? It's just this open discussion.
My approach is...
Wow.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Go, BG. No, go.
I was about to say my approach was completely different and a bit more sinister than that. A year before I got married, I taught my wife to code. It was like a foolproof way of doing. Hear me out, right? So she studied analytical chemistry in varsity. And at the time, she was struggling to kind of like, find work to do with that. And I was like, great, let me just teach you how to code. And then like you won't struggle to find a job. She's been a developer since 2016. Yeah, since 2016. So about 5 years or so now, right? What that has created is that we can spend quality time and still solve my technical problems. Because
genius.
Because I can talk to her about code, and I'm not talking about work. Like I'm just like speaking, generally, right? And because I mean, she spends a lot of time as well, like upskilling. We can actually, talk. I've never spent time trying to fully understand JavaScript. But I learned about hoisting and context and all of that from talking to her, right? We'd be having coffee in the morning and then we're talking about JavaScript and hoisting. And sometimes she'll listen to me interviewing people. And, during our quality time, like, I mean, there's certain things like I kind of like do religiously as well. Like in the evening, we'll go for a walk. In the morning, we'll sit and have tea or coffee or anything like that. During the weekend, we'll make time for something else. But I think because she understands like the context of programming and like how something that was supposed to be 15 minutes can end up being 3 hours, then she doesn't get mad at it. And sometimes I don't have to be sitting.
Can she teach some project managers?
Look, so I think the easiest way, Zano, is like teach your girlfriend how to code.
Bring them on site.
I've got an easier way.
So I tried.
I married an advocate. So that means that like if I come out of my office too soon, she's like, "Are you rich yet?" And then I'm like, "No." She's like, "Get back inside." Like you go work and you work harder.
It's worse for me because my girlfriend's actually a software dev. I would say in a sense that she studied software engineering, and she was like, "Nope, this is not for me. I'm gonna be a BA. I literally don't like this."
Oh shit!
And just get her to write specs for your side projects.
Contley, sorry man to keep you waiting.
Yeah, no, not a problem. Good evening, everyone. I have a short question, and it's like, how do you know when you're failing? I think we're very motivated as people, and we can get into this loop of trying to make it work at all costs and never know when to stop. So, like, how do you know when you're failing? Like when you're failing and you should quit and go do something else.
Yeah. So, that's a great question. The short is that there's no answer, but this is how I approach it, right? So, I'll decide. I'll think about a project until I'm like, yes, this is something that I want to do. Yes, I think it's valuable, and like, I'm willing to put in however much effort. If it turns out to be like, let's say, double the amount of effort, I'm like, okay, maybe it's not really worth it anymore. But otherwise, I build it until it's done through those kind of dark patches where you're like, I really don't want to be doing this. You build it till it's done, and you put a little bow on it, and you're like, okay, cool, fine. And you can carry on deving if you want. But for me, when it dies is when you've stopped having interest in it. You stop being excited about it or wanting to use it or something. But as long as it's out there, then I think it's you don't have to be sad about it, right? Because again, it comes back to expectations. Like, expect that you're going to have 10 projects like that, and the 11th is going to be the one that's, makes you some money or whatever, or like whatever your kind of goal is. But yeah, for me, it's like I'm very passion led. So sometimes I'll work solidly for like 4 months, day and night, on a thing, and then just be like, oh, I'm actually over this for now, and then I'll move on to something else, and then I'll come back and whatever. But these products are done though, by the way, so they're already launched, both of them. So yeah, for me, it's like launch it, and then you can decide if you hate it or not.
But my advice is like on that is take a break. Like if you get to a point where you're like over it, take a week, 2 weeks where you just like, for all intents and purposes, have given up on the project, and then come back from a sober mind and reevaluate. And I take this. I mean, I'm not a developer. I've been involved in products. I'm not a developer per se, but it comes from that adage: never send an email. Like always sleep on an important email. It's an adage. Always sleep on an important email. So adage. What did I say?
Adage.
Adage.
Like the age of
It's
it.
fine. We're liberal with our speech here. Anyway, adage. Always sleep on an important email. So, like, if you're going to send an important email, write it, go to sleep, and then read it again in the morning. And I think that principle applies here. You know, like, because often it's easy. You know, like you get to the point where you're like, I must give up, but you know, you might be burnt out. You might just need a break.
Okay, I'm actually going to disagree with you.
That's fine. It's a free country. I can say adage. You can say adage.
I think that you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you take 2 or 3 weeks off before you've decided that it's done. Exactly for the reason that I stated earlier of pushing through. If you stop yourself from learning to push through, right? You are the skill that is the skill that you're learning when you're building all of these products. It's how do you get to the finish line, right? You're learning to code along the way, you're learning product market fit, you're learning all these things. But the skill that you're building up is pushing through and finishing something. Because that's what actually determines success.
So to be clear, like I'm saying this if you're at the point where you're like, I'm going to give up and never touch it again. So at like that point,
like project burnout,
just never touching it again. Like come back again in 3 weeks and then decide, make a final decision.
Just push through.
I do agree with you, though.
Be a bit like Goggins.
Yeah, but Kyle, not everyone can.
Read David
not everyone
Goggins
is.
And say,
read David Goggins.
If I walk away now, I'm just going to be ordinary. If that's fine, that's fine. You can be ordinary, bro. But don't you want to be more than ordinary?
Yeah,
Get
David
back,
Goggins.
do another half an hour.
You had to
coding,
pull the
bro.
David Goggins out. No one can argue with David Goggins.
Yeah.
It's impossible.
Cool. I think we had another question.
From who?
Can I go?
Yeah, you can go.
Thank
Yes.
you. Hi. I wanted to know. I'm actually not sure. I hopped in like in the middle of this space, and you guys were talking about what sounds like product management, and I got quite excited. But my question maybe is for Kyle and the startup kid. So I spent quite a lot of time convincing people what they should go for as the MVP. And, you get the people who make the decisions and they spend the money, and eventually everyone agrees, even though not everyone is going to be happy, but we have something to start with, right? And we can go and start working. Then you go back and you do the work with the dev teams and, the design teams, and everyone is excited. Everyone starts working, the testing happens, we deploy and we go live. Everyone's grinded and, sleepless nights and coffee. And then the product goes, the MVP goes live, which is, I guess, a product in itself. And the feedback starts coming in and everyone gets depressed. And it's like everyone forgot that this is exactly why we were doing this, so that we can get as much feedback from the actual user as quickly as possible. So my question is, how do you keep the teams, the people who are actually doing the work, on the vision, just encouraged and motivated? Because you can only tell them, so many times that we want feedback and people what they want. I mean, we went live with a beautiful, beautiful app with the MVP, and people came back and they said, why don't you do facial recognition? And it's like, seriously? How is that the one thing that's depressing us when we've taken something that's so beautiful live?
If you think that's bad, I once spent like a lot of sleepless nights. I think back in 2018 in 2015. We investigated cross-platform software development for a client, and I was excited to be, the first developer releasing like a Xamarin app at that scale, for one of the telcos in the country. And one of the reviews, like, it sits with me today. Look, obviously it was a rewrite, so the feature set was much smaller than the original app, but like the original app was just not maintainable anymore. And the reviews was, my grandmother can write a better app on tissue paper with a crayon.
It's amazing, man. What do you mean? Does
And
it
you
sit
like-
with you at like your little on the wall or something?
Like,
I'm proud of it.
I think at least once every 3 months I have bad dreams about that review. Right? Look,
Oh, that's funny.
I think one of the mistakes that teams make is that like you decide on an MVP from a point of vanity, and you spend 3 months to 6 months and think only then you'll have like feedback from a user. I think conversations with the user has to happen like even at the design phase with some sketches of something. Ask people what they think something means. I think it's easier to keep the team on the right track. That way, like when you include the user like very early, and the user could be like 2 people that in the first like stage, and then you start to expand out of that. And the second thing is to teach your team not to take everything personally, right? Because not every feedback from the customer is going to be right. I often tell people that like if you build like a perfect product, people are not going to come back and tell you that it's perfect.
Yes.
Like they're just going to use it and like enjoy using it. So spending like too much time focusing on the negative feedback, like it's not everything that you should take on board. If it's really useful feedback, yeah, sure, test it with other customers as well. But your team needs to understand that like the good stuff that your team has done, the likelihood of people coming back and say you've done this great is very low. So if there's not a lot of noise about the other stuff you've delivered, more than likely you've delivered well. But include your customer from the get-go. Like a user story should not be some made-up requirement by a business analyst. It should be an actual user story. And I think like the more you engage with your customers, the more you test your ideas, like the more confidence that you have that you're on the right track early before you even your first release.
Yeah.
So I'd like to add to that actually. So my view is that I think it's important to reframe things for the team. So there's a lot of hype about having a strong vision, a big true north. Like what is the why, quote unquote, of what you're trying to build. And the reason I think that's so important is because of the reframing. So if you focus on the why, customer feedback is telling you how to do your why better. Whereas if you're focusing on the feature, customer feedback is telling you that you're wrong. And I think that there's a very powerful difference there, So it's sort of like taking a step back and looking at the forest for the trees, and sort of saying like, what are we trying to achieve and what are we building? And then like, does this feedback coincide with that? Because there's always going to be that one guy that comes on and is like, oh no, we need a red button. It makes no sense. There's no reason for it or whatnot, and it's easy to be like, oh my god, we need a red button, and you build a red button, and then like people are like, what does a red button do? And you're like, I don't know.
Yeah.
The customer wants a red button.
So my quick 2 cents is basically what Kyle said, but hopefully more in a different way, concisely, is that sell the vision and keep the team focused on the vision, right? Where you're going, so you can ignore the chaff that comes from the side, like feedback that is effectively meaningless or short term. And the second thing is understand what you're testing, right? So an MVP, you're testing something. You're testing some core proposition. So understand what you're testing and focus on that feedback. if you're testing the onboarding flow for a journey, focus on the feedback that is related to the onboarding flow, not the graphics, not the size of the buttons, not what happens after the flow, not the app loading time. None of that matters, because what you're testing is the onboarding flow, and then just iterate from there. And I
Yeah.
think when you start to see the feedback like that, and you say, oh, okay, this is how I'm going to improve it. It's literally a little roadmap on improvement. You can keep everyone happy and motivated, hopefully.
Yeah, we didn't get feedback on the onboarding process because it was working perfectly. But
Yeah,
because we didn't
there you
cater
go.
for the facial recognition, which we are not in the business of, that's the one complaint that came through, because I think maybe everybody got new phones or something and they just suddenly wanted to unlock all their
Red
Learn
apps
button.
Face
with
ID.
their faces, and it was
Yeah.
like, oh, how can you guys not do this? It's like, Jesus Christ.
Look,
Red button.
look. I think sometimes it's like valid feedback. I remember last year sometime people brought up multi-factor authentication to the guys at Easy Equities, and Charles was like on the timeline and said we don't need that and whatnot, and it's just like a bad look, because maybe there is a valid concern. And the flip side of that is like there's a concept called bike shedding, right? So like imagine you're working at like a nuclear power plant. The specialists who understand how like nuclear technology work of like not as many as like the other people who might understand what color like a bike shed should be. So if you start talking about like what nuclear technology that we should use there, and you have like a room of 30 and only 2 specialists, the likelihood of someone having an input is low. But if in the same room you start saying, you know what we should have a bike shed. Suddenly Kyle says, oh, the bike shed should be blue. And VT says, no, it should be red. And other Kyle says it should be green, right? And Tony says it should be pink. Because a bike shed is something so simple and so fundamental that all of us can have input. So you need to be aware of the fact that like your users, who think they're specialists all of a sudden, might have a lot of suggestions because they've seen something somewhere else, and it might or might not be useful information. But as Kyle said, if you know what you're measuring, then you have, like the right metric for you to determine whether that feedback is useful or not.
Thank you. I think that's it for me. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and also,
Cool,
but also I
thanks.
found that there's this one guy, if you actually if you watch like pit scaling, one guy says if you have a customer and they want free items, you can also say, well, you're not my customer. You can reject a customer, and if they're taking advantage of whatever product you're building or they want it for free, well, they can get lost too. I mean, everybody knows if it provides value, you're going to pay for it. So don't try and do free work for somebody that wants to take advantage of you either. And that's the thing. Often, we try and we think, oh, the market is where the free is. Well, iPhones, Apple's proved it's not, because people buy iPhones all the time, right? And so, like, if you bought a quality product for a quality solution, then people expect to pay, and people will if it's solving their problem, as Kyle said. Don't solve a problem you think will make you money. Like, solve a problem or like the one person says, solve a problem that you're having, because you're most likely in the area that you would pay to solve it. And yeah, often people solve problems that aren't problems, and then you have that problem trying to find somebody you pay for it later, and that's difficult.
100%. Welcome, Tony. How's it?
How's it, Tony? There's that awkward silence you're talking
You're
about.
on mute, Tony.
No, he's just not interested.
Okay, maybe Tony is
Tony? Blink
using the brain.
While
Okay.
Tony's trying to set up, can I ask one final question?
No, go ahead.
Sure.
Okay. How do you stop yourself from imposter syndrome when you know you're capable of doing something, but but you all of a sudden you just keep throwing yourself into this rabbit hole of thinking you gotta upskill, but you literally at a point where you've kind of done the thing you want to do, but now it's that if you feel like it's not perfect.
So for me, because I think you should actually continue to have some form of imposter syndrome, right? Because you're never at the end. And if you are, you're probably in the wrong career. So for me, the answer is generally just to actually upskill. So it's to do the thing that you don't feel like you're capable of doing, and then upskill as well. That's the only way to do anything, to be honest. Yeah, so embrace it, I guess, would be my thing. Because like what happens, right, is in the beginning, you have imposter syndrome that's real. Well, no, you just don't know what you're doing. You start to learn and you feel super confident and you're like, oh my God, like this is amazing. And I'm the king of the world. And then you learn more and you're like, oh my God, I actually know nothing. And then you kind of start again at a much slower angle. So like even now, I'm like, do I even know how to code? Like honestly, asking myself honest questions, like, am I actually any good at coding? When I've been coding for like, I don't know, 20 years now. But it could always be better. Like there's a bunch of stuff that I haven't learned that maybe I should have learned, but so embrace it and just grow with it.
I've looked at it differently. I don't think I struggle a lot with imposter syndrome anymore. Like, look, not saying it's completely gone, but the last time I did, I had to kind of like reframe it for myself. I used to think like you get imposter syndrome because you feel like you don't belong like in the spaces that you're in. Because like imposter syndrome usually comes from like you're already in that space and you feel like you don't belong there, right? And so you maybe throw yourself into upskilling or anything like that. And for me, and I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like imposter syndrome always happened because I assumed that my colleagues who were in that space were like remarkable, and the imposter syndrome settled in when I realized that they were not that different or that remarkable, right? Like that there was like I felt like I was missing something because like surely there has to be this magical thing that they're doing that I'm just like not in the inner circle like enough to understand, and I don't belong here because like I don't have that piece of magic. And when I accepted that there is no magic, like I struggled a bit like less because then I can be honest with myself as to like I know that like I'm like there's some things I don't know about this area, right? So I think like there's this 4 quadrants about the unconscious incompetence, and then conscious competence, and then conscious incompetence. Well, that kind of thing. So it's like it's okay to be the foolish beginner, right? And if I'm in a space and I'm fitting in with my colleagues, it's probably because like I belong in that space, and the things that I'm not competent enough at, right, I can learn. And I need to be patient enough with myself to learn, and then I don't struggle so much with imposter syndrome because of that. I hope that helps.
I think it's also realizing that like most people don't know what's going on. Like most people are flaming in the dark, but also realizing that some people have like 3 watch torches. Like not everyone has got a full view. Like, well, no one's got a full view of everything. But there are some people that have torches. So there are some people that have like a really good take on certain things. But like a torch, you can only focus it on a sort of finite area. And I think it's important to realize that, because like what sort of helped me is like you fly to Switzerland and then you find out that there's banks that have a person hired to scan documents on the scanner because it's the only way they can get documents into their core banking system. Or working with banks and finding out like how bad certain codes like is, or whatever the case is, certain systems, but not sort of falling prey to the other extreme, which is that no one knows anything, because then you can so easily write off very well-informed opinions and takes because you're like, oh, no one knows anything, and you miss out. So I think, like, at least that's the way I like to look at it, is that it's, everyone's playing in the dark, but some people have torches.
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's because I'm older. No, I'm just
brow.
thinking about this stuff now, because maybe it's because I'm older and I don't know, care less, or I'm more confident or whatever. But I don't even see imposter syndrome as any issue at all, right? It's discomfort associated with growth, effectively, right? So you're sitting listening and you're like, okay, I need to, I'm in this room, to use Vita's example, I'm in this room and everyone knows everything else that I don't. Should I be here? Okay, let me just act like I should be here, and I'll then make myself be here by growing and absorbing everything I can, and then going and learning and reading and like whatever. And then maybe, that tends to confidence or whatever. Because, dude, I mean, when I became head of engineering at the company that I've just left now, it's a completely different job. Like, it had nothing to do with being an engineer, right? And it's like, well, I'll just figure it out. Like I was, so it wasn't, no syndrome involved. I was an imposter. I had the skills that I could.
Real life imposter.
What is it? You were promoted to the level of your incompetence.
Yeah. So I was just like, look, I'm sure I have the skills somewhere, and I'll just kind of put it together in certain ways that I think makes sense, but I'm literally just making it up as I go along. And that's the deal, right? And so yeah, I think you should lean into it and just accept that that's part of life, basically.
So that's kind of what I was saying. Like, when I say people are flaming in the dark, is that most people are just making it up as they go along. Like, there's no sort of central repository of knowledge for everything, where these, like, Jeff Bezos of the world or Mark Zuckerberg of the world have a library card for whatever. They're just like creating it, and making it happen, and sort of dictating the parameters. And I think it's so important to realize that, like, I guess it's something, it's a really good lesson back when I was in sales, is realizing that CEOs, bump their foot in the shower, or, go to the bathroom or brush their teeth. And it's an exercise in humanizing people, because, you go to a sales meeting and you're meeting with the CEO and you're just like the sales guy. There's this natural sort of misalignment of hierarchy. And when you think of that person brushing their teeth, all of a sudden you're on the same playing field. And when you treat them on that playing field, like, with the general respect and decorum you should give everyone, but when you treat them on that same level playing field, they invariably treat you back in that way. Just the same way as that if you sort of treat them as this, pedestal CEO, they naturally like take up that stance, take up that position, and that hierarchy falls out. So, yeah.
I just recently left quite a big organization, 300 people. And a lot of teams, they sit there waiting for this magical person to come along to show them how to do it. And you're sitting there going, well, guys, there is no magical JavaScript genie who's going to come do it for you. You've got to learn how to do it yourself.
You are the magical person.
And the big thing I put it is also, a lot of people tend to have, like, they want, if they're going to be a backend engineer, they'll only do like Python or only do JavaScript. If you do that, you kind of have to beat everybody else at that. If you learn something like Nginx or like Flutter or something different to your normal core, you already add a dimension that other people don't. And that helps you also, become relevant, but see a different way to solve the problem. Because if you only know that one approach, you keep repeating that. But yes, I fully agree. Like, we're not going to make cloud engineers. We're not going to find cloud engineers in the market, because first of all, they've all gone to Europe, and then the rest that are behind, they're all getting paid a lot. So what you got to do is you actually got to train them up, and that just means, you're just doing it. It's the information's there.
No. Thanks for that. Wayne, sorry, I'm sure your hand must be tired now. How's it?
No worries. Kyle, lovely to meet you, and lovely listening to the conversation thus far. Kind of interesting, probably experience shares as well, is being an engineer and starting and building a business at the same time. Very different hats, very different skill sets, and maybe a bit of shares around that. And that's before I started BASALT, I was consulting to a lot of specialist technologists / developers, engineers on the business mentoring side of things, because very different, and we learn our lessons in the war stories that we have. But I think, and also just pondering to myself over the past few weeks, and you look at these big tech giants, and you say Mark Zuckerberg, and how well does he know finance, or does he manage his finances? Is he a salesman? And even if he has a sales team, someone's still got to direct, lead, and or inspire that team. And is that the CEO, or is it just an engineer? And Elon Musk, you've heard focus on engineering. I just want to be an engineer, and engineering is all I do. But how does the rest of the biggest companies in the world manage and
We're losing you though, man.
I don't know if it's just me, but we cut the when we just missed the last bit of that.
Yeah, so just looking at Elon Musk and just seeing, he's an engineer, wants to be an engineer, and made it very clear. But who runs the rest of the business, and how does it tick and work? Still, him being the CEO as only an engineer. Kyle, Vita, it's just interesting to get your guys' take on business development, engineering, and putting it all together, and how you wear those hats.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. So for me, it's there are different skill sets, but it's kind of like going from a full stack engineer, right? So learning back end, front end, or whatever, to learning the other. It's like a full stack product person, right? So you have the product, but you need the sales and marketing and all of these things. But then also clearly understanding, like we addressed earlier, when you what do you build and what do you buy or use, understanding where you should put your energy, like where you're going to get the most out of it. If it's in your USP, focus, but like I'm not going to go and learn how to do books to run a business. I'll just pay an accounting firm and then make enough money to do that, right? So I'm not going to, I need to understand about marketing, but they're experts in this. And it helps to understand the first little piece of it, but you only have so much time and energy, so you need to allocate accordingly, effectively. I mean, Elon is like, I don't know, like very out there in terms of his capabilities, but even with SpaceX, where he's effectively the CTO, or like chief engineer, whatever you want to call it, I think it's Glenn Shotwell is his COO, and she runs basically everything, while Elon is doing half of the other stuff. And Tesla, I think there's some sort of similar situation. But I mean, he's like probably 4 C-suite execs in one. It's good to aim for, but unrealistic, I think, for most people.
I think it's similar to what I think it was Rod who said earlier, that you're never going to make a better, reset password, or whatever the example was. Like, it's so important to have an understanding of how it works. As a sort of business owner or CEO or executive, whatever. Like, understanding what each of these departments entail, at least on the foundational level. And then letting people that have specialized in that space, run and own it, because they're invariably going to be better at it than you are. But it's so important to know a little bit about it.
Like with Kyle, I forgot password thing. It's like, junior engineers should not have to go and bake like their own user create user, update user. Because I mean, I look at the code that they're written in this company, and he was doing like user checks. But let Amazon do that. Let a $2 trillion company do that, and then also for GPDR, you would have to then also know all the legal reasons and how to store it properly. Again, they've already done this for you. Let's leverage them to make us more nimble and focus on the core product, the core experience. Like take one page that people are going to go to every day, make that amazing, make them come back and use it. And that's, I think, what people fail to realize, I feel.
It's got cost benefit, right? Because at the end of the day, you can learn about finance and because everything's a skill, right? Sales and marketing and finance and all those things. It's not like some kind of inborn talent that you have, that you're born and you, like, beautiful mind, understand numbers. Like, you can learn that stuff. But the question is it worth doing that? Like, there's a cost to that, So, for example, Elon Musk, he spent hours and hours sitting at a bar reading a book on rockets. Is that something you're willing to do? Maybe it is, and that's fine. But can your time be spent elsewhere? Because as a CEO or a founder or whatever the case is, there might be a niche that you're particularly good at. What is the thing that you're better at than everyone else? Focus on that and let the people that are good at those respective things take those reins.
Cool. Thanks, Kyle. Kudzai, how's it, man? Sorry for keeping you waiting. So you had a question.
Oh yeah, no, not a problem. Thank you, Arjun, so much for this space. I think now I'm a little bit late. I just wanted to jump in on the imposter syndrome that the other gent mentioned earlier on. So I think in my case, I remember in my first year of working, I was facing this thing, but simply because I didn't have the vocab to describe what I'm facing, I had no idea what I'm going through. So until later on in the year, that's when I started to know, okay, this is what I'm going through. It's called the imposter syndrome. And then I ended up speaking to a couple of, developers, engineers who were more experienced than me. And funny enough, everyone was sharing the same sentiment. You're almost walking on this never-ending journey. And because you're learning every day, there has to be that healthy dose of imposter syndrome that you have. In some sense, it kind of keeps you humble because you'll be willing to learn. So there's this concept that they actually shared with me. It's called, let me just have a look quick here. It's called the Johari window. I'm going to share it in this space. So they basically say this helps you to understand yourself better and also to understand what it is that other people see in you. So like in dev, you're always working in teams, right? The mere fact that you are there contributing something, it means you do have a certain amount of value that you're offering. And everyone has got a certain amount of value that they're offering. And then together as a team, you guys achieve the goal. So yeah, that being said, I think just having a look at that Johari's window might be something worthwhile if you are, facing this imposter syndrome. And like the other gentleman said earlier on, it's something that you're always going to face going forward. Even in my case, to this day, I still face the same thing. But yeah, thank you so much. That's all I wanted to share.
It's awesome. I've heard about that before, so that's a great shot. Yeah.
Cool, guys. So I think
let's
wrap up here.
Go ahead.
Going on for
Yes.
sorry, VT. We're going on for an hour and 40 minutes, which is a good time, right? Interesting conversations. Kyle's thought to get married, and his fiance is waiting. My voice permeates everything, so I've probably kept my son up, which means that I've got a wife to deal with now, and VT's handsome. So, guys, we're gonna try and do this every first Wednesday of the month, just to get together, talk about products, talk about business, talk about technology.